Dr. Marissa Strident is a super successful person who loves life to the fullest. Imagine her conquering the tallest mountains in the world with her beloved husband, Robert. But what happens when disaster strikes in the Everest Death Zone, 8,000 meters above ground? As Robert achieves his biggest climbing goal, he starts feeling strangely empty inside. But why though? It is a story like no other. In the month of May 2016, Robert Grupel and his wife, Marissa Strident, embarked on a journey. They found themselves at the base camp of Mount Everest, which was an awe-inspiring place. Their goal was to climb to the top of the world, something they had dreamed of and worked hard for over the years. Robert had always loved climbing since he was a young child, and he had conquered his first peak when he was just 8 years old. He became passionate about climbing from that moment on. Marissa came into Robert's life when they were both studying at Queensland University. She was studying veterinary science, but soon fell in love with the wonders of the great outdoors, just like Robert. They got married and settled in Melbourne, Australia. They shared a dream of climbing the tallest mountains in the world, with Mount Everest being the grandest of them all. While they had experienced adventure before, Mount Everest was a huge challenge that surpassed anything they had done in the past. Both Robert and Marissa's families, although not against their adventurous pursuit, couldn't help but feel worried. They asked many questions and expressed their concerns, hoping the couple would reconsider their decision. When Marissa's mother traveled all the way to Melbourne, she had a strong urge to say goodbye to her daughter and wish her luck. The atmosphere was filled with intense emotions. Hearing Marissa's mother's voice crack as she talked about the days leading up to the expedition sent a chill down my spine. It's hard to imagine the feelings someone would have when they know their loved one is about to embark on an extremely dangerous journey driven by a strong sense of purpose. As Rob and Marissa's parents waved goodbye, there was still a glimmer of hope, expecting to welcome them back through the same door they had always entered. In case you didn't know, 2016 was the first climbing season after a devastating earthquake with a magnitude of 7.8 hit Nepal and its neighboring countries in 2015. The destruction caused by the earthquake was widespread, with visible remains of the devastation in the surrounding areas. Entire communities were left in ruins, and the lives of the people living there were forever changed. On Mount Everest alone, the earthquake took the lives of 22 people at the base camp, and the tragedy extended to thousands of people across the country. It's important to mention that the 2015 climbing season was mainly focused on recovery efforts because the aftermath of the earthquake required attention. As the new season arrived in 2016, both mountaineering companies and climbers were eager to return to the challenging slopes of Everest. So when Rob and Marissa reached the base camp after a week-long hike, they were met with a bustling scene. The landscape was filled with numerous tents, indicating the preparations for the upcoming busy season. Accompanied by 3 Sherpas, Rob and Marissa wasted no time in starting the process of acclimatization, fully aware of the difficulties that awaited them as they headed toward the southern side of the mountain. Marissa was incredibly close to reaching the summit of Mount Everest, but the final part of the climb from the south summit was very challenging due to the dangerous terrain. After enduring 14 exhausting hours in the death zone, both Marissa and Rob were suffering from the effects of high-altitude sickness. The levels of oxygen were dangerously low. However, Rob was consumed by summit fever, a state where the desire to reach the top becomes stronger than concerns for safety. Despite feeling weak and tired, Rob made a decision that would impact the rest of their journey. He asked Marissa if he could continue while she stayed at the south summit with one of the Sherpas. With Marissa's unwavering support, Rob embarked on the final part of the climb, driven by his lifelong dream. As Marissa and her Sherpa began their descent back to Camp 4 at 9 a.m., Rob pressed on. Hours later, he stood at the top of the world. However, a feeling of unease washed over him. Standing there alone, without Marissa, made the experience feel incomplete. The summit had always been a dream they shared, but now it lacked the depth and significance it had when they were together. Rob's time at the summit was short-lived, capturing only 1 photograph before swiftly starting his descent. Rob's condition worsened rapidly as he experienced hallucinations and an inability to walk. It's difficult to fully describe his condition, but it's known that he often resorted to sliding, resting, and attempting to walk again. Remarkably, even in this compromised state, Rob persisted and eventually reached the south summit where Marissa had been waiting. On her own descent, Marissa faced similar challenges as Rob, each step requiring immense effort, accompanied by falls and moments of rest. They repeated this grueling process, slowly progressing just around 10 meters at a time. Maria pushed herself to her limits, determined to endure as long as possible. Eventually, her body reached a point where it couldn't bear the strain anymore. Exhausted and unable to stand, she had to be carried back to Camp 4, arriving at 2 a.m. after enduring an excruciating 31 hours in the death zone. In the crowded tent, Maria's exhaustion was apparent as she struggled to listen to others, but her only request being to see her husband. Meanwhile, Rob continued his descent, a dangerous journey marked by a moment of sleep that put him at risk. Thankfully, another team on their way to the summit came across him, waking him up from his slumber. They checked his oxygen supply, which had completely run out. Urging him to continue descending, they emphasized the grave consequences of stopping in the death zone. After Rob managed to return to Camp 4, he was completely exhausted and even fell asleep while walking. Worried about Maria's condition, a friend urged him to check on her. During the night, Maria showed slight improvement with the help of oxygen and some food. However, the situation was still dangerous. She was at risk of falling into a dangerous sleep. Communication between the team and the base camp became more urgent, emphasizing the need to keep Maria awake, as falling asleep could have irreversible consequences. The base camp worked on organizing a rescue, but the harsh conditions in the death zone made it impossible for a rescue team to reach them. With the sunrise at 8 a.m., Maria experienced moments of clarity and moments of hallucination. Despite the uncertainty, she was able to walk, although barely. They had no choice but to start their descent, slowly making their way down the mountain. Their progress was painfully slow due to their weakened state. Finally, they managed to leave the death zone, giving them a glimmer of hope for a potential rescue. However, tragedy struck shortly after they descended below 8,000 meters. Step by step, Maria continued walking until she reached a tragic moment. She slipped, got tangled in the rope, and fell off the route. Rob called out, using all his strength to reach her and hold her in his arms, but it was too late. Exhausted and overwhelmed by the mountain's demands, Maria passed away in her husband's embrace. Rob and the rest of the team eventually made it off Everest without further incidents. However, Maria's body remained on the mountain for several weeks until her family could arrange for her descent and final resting place. Rob himself survived the ordeal but suffered severe frostbite. However, it was the emotional pain that affected him the most, as he grappled with intense guilt and grief. Even to this day, he struggles to talk about those final days on the mountain. This story is deeply hurtful. Imagine the depth of his love for his wife and the weight of his sorrow. Above all, Maria's words continue to resonate with us. It's one thing to fail, but it's another to give up. The story of Rob and Maria tells us the triumphs and tragedies that can happen on the world's highest mountain. Their shared love for climbing led them on an extraordinary adventure, facing the dangers and challenges of Mount Everest together. But it also tells us about the risks involved in pursuing our dreams, especially in dangerous places like the death zone. The mountain commands respect and can be unforgiving to even the most experienced climbers. It shows us that nature doesn't care about our ambitions, and that we can be humbled by its power. However, amidst the difficulties and losses, there is a valuable lesson to be learned. The unwavering love and support that Rob and Maria had for each other, their willingness to sacrifice for one another, shows us the strength of their bond. Their story teaches us to cherish our loved ones and appreciate every moment we have together.